The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
I always feel a little conflicted when we do our season-ending show. It's kind of like grade school's last day. You're thrilled to be done with school and begin summer vacation, yet you're going to miss most of your friends at school who you won't see until September. Regrettably, this is our last show of our winter-spring season, but we will be back Sunday, September 12th, for our full fall season at our fall time, which begins at 10:30 a.m. The earlier time is necessitated because of Fox NFL Sunday, which begins airing at 11 a.m. on Fox 56. We conclude this season with a special guest, Pennsylvania Senator Dave Argall of the 29th District, which includes 94 municipalities and large parts of Berks and Schuylkill counties. Senator Argall is a member of the Republican Leadership Caucus in the Senate and serves as the chairman of the SRCC, also known as the Senate Republican Campaign Committee. He is also the majority chairman of the powerful Senate State Government Committee, which has jurisdiction over election laws, including the drawing of the redistricting maps, as well as constitutional amendments. There could be no better guest to discuss several issues, such as the recent mandate by voters empowering the legislature to terminate Governor Wolf's dictatorial use of emergency orders, as well as the voter ID bill that will soon come to a floor vote by the General Assembly, as well as a discussion on the redistricting which is currently taking place. Senator Argall is also Dr. Argall. He earned a bachelor's degree from Lycoming College, and his PhD is in public administration from Penn State. His studies included the Eisenhower Fellowship to review the economic and political transformations in Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall. His doctoral dissertation consisted of a review of governmental opportunity zones for economic development. We could have no better guest to end this season than Senator Argall.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Senator, and I will immediately add, because you're worthy of this designation, Dr. Argall, which when you go through the effort to get a PhD beside your other accomplishments, it's worthy of notion. You're into rare air. There are, I'm sure, very few in any Senate chamber in the country that have. There are a fair number of lawyers, very few PhD doctors. So we have a public administration doctor on the show. So to add even more credibility to you being an expert in terms of the opinions you're going to give. As we talked off air, Senator, this show wasn't originally scheduled, but when I had the benefit of some of the knowledge that was imparted to me last week, that you had shepherded and were a key player in the historic resolutions that were based on only a month ago's overwhelming mandate by the voters, effectively empowering the General Assembly to strip the governor of emergency powers, and you acted on that new power, and you helped draw those resolutions and get them through the Senate. It went through the House and the Senate, and there were some back and forth that went on. I thought, I can't end the season without putting you on, so I thank you in advance for your time. But talk a little bit about those historic resolutions, why it was done, and some of the machinations that you went through to get it done.
Remember that in the early days of the pandemic, I think everyone understood this isn't something we had a lot of experience with. And we gave the governor some slack. We understood that, this was an emergency and this was unprecedented, at least for 100 years. But as weeks turned into months and months and months, the public, including the people I represent in places like Schuylkill and Berks County, began to get a little tired of one-man rule. And on the Senate floor, I stood up and I used this prop, which is one of the most famous paintings up in the governor's office up on the second floor in the Capitol. And I said, this is William Penn receiving the royal charter from King Charles II in, I think, 1681. The governor got the wrong idea. He's not the king. And a lot of other senators and a lot of other representatives picked up on that. I think we saw it in some of the advertising in November. But eventually, we tried to work with the governor unsuccessfully. He wanted to continue to lead on his own without working with county commissioners, without working with local government, without working with the House and Senate. And eventually we decided the only way to end that kind of one-man rule is by amending the Constitution. That's exactly what we did, and we were the first state in the country to do that.
Well, congratulations, Senator. The viewers in our media market understand my position has been all along that it was an unconstitutional violation of fundamental rights in this country. I'm proud to tell you on this show, on some of the major issues, we were right. I called early on that what the governor did with his lockdowns was illegal and unconstitutional. And of course, the federal judge, Judge Stickman, ruled that in fact they were. I also went on to say they were corrupt because he withheld who got waivers and didn't from the press. I said they were unfair and they were incompetent. That was all corroborated by his fellow Democratic Auditor General, Eugene D. Pasquale, who in a scathing audit said all of that. In fact, he referred to them as a Keystone Cops routine. And most recently, there was more sad news, Senator. A CDC study showed that there was a 50% increase during the pandemic of emergency room admissions for teenage girls' attempted suicide. And we were one of the first people to call out the moral issue that no one wanted to talk about. In their rush to save everybody from COVID and prevent them from getting it, they never contemplated the lives they were going to destroy, the bankruptcies, the domestic abuse, the mental illness. Suicides are up at historic numbers. So we were kind of hitting those themes, and hindsight has shown you guys in the General Assembly, what we were reporting on the Volpe report were correct. And that gets back to something I want to just mention to you. One of the first issues by other senators on this show, Senator Udicek, Senator Corman, and others that participated, they kept talking about the lack of collaboration. And one of the first things, you know what? It bothered me, and I said this on a show. One of Governor Wolf's heroes was President John F. Kennedy. And Governor Wolf heard the call and joined the Peace Corps that Kennedy formed in the early 60s. Well, he didn't get all of Senator Kennedy's lessons, because when this country faced the ultimate crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, the first thing Senator Kennedy did was form the ExComm, where he brought in, I believe, 12 to 14 members to give him their expertise to collaborate. He had the leadership of the House and the Senate in Washington, Sam Rayburn and people like that, I believe Mike Mansfield, coming up to the White House to give him their guidance. Well, apparently the governor didn't get that lesson from President John F. Kennedy, how in the time of crisis to collaborate with people that just might help you avoid all the mistakes that he made. Your comment on that?
We studied exactly that example in college in some leadership training classes. I think they said they looked at the Bay of Pigs, where they only had a small group, and groupthink came into play. And of course, it was a disaster. They learned from that mistake. Hopefully, Governor Wolf learns from this mistake as well.
Yes. Well, so let's talk a little bit about the resolutions now. Based on your constitutional authority, talk about you getting them done and through. And I know there was some jockeying that went on back and forth. I understand there was somewhat of a compromise that the governor continued certain executive orders for regulations. So talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, we understood. I mean, we did not want to end telemedicine. That was existing in hospitals because of a waiver. We thought that was important, keep that going. There were some other things. We're still working out some of the final details as to how restaurants and bars will begin to operate. But the important thing was we wanted to end the emergency. We wanted to honor the voters' commitment in the district that I represent, Schuylkill County, Berks County, it was a landslide. It wasn't even close. And so I think the voters have spoken. And so we tried to keep small pieces of the emergency that made perfect sense. But overall, we said the emergency is now over and we can begin. People want to just go back to normal. We don't want people to get sick. We want to protect the public health, but we also want to do it on an even basis, not one person acting like a king.
Right. Obviously, you're now, by demonstration in what you very eloquently stated, Senator, you just explained what collaboration does when they're forced to do it. You get the best possible outcome, that maybe no one person is the smartest person in the room. In one of the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, in an editorial, I think, written for, I want to say the Washington Post, the editorial went on to say that John Kennedy assembled the best and the brightest, the most erudite cabinet in the history of this country. And it went on to say that he did not need to be the smartest man in the room. That's how smart he was. And that's an example of why collaboration always works. And people understood in their gut, even though that wording was the most slanted, I would say illegal wording for a constitutional amendment designed to fail, an overwhelming number of people heard the message and voted on it.
Had we had fair wording on that question, it wouldn't have just been a landslide in Schuylkill County. It would have been a landslide across the state.
No question. Now, we mentioned in your open, Senator, when I do, as all my guests, I do that myself. We talked about some of the power you have and the committees you're on. One of the most important, of course, that got you involved in the constitutional amendment, and that is the state government committee that you chair, majority chairman. That has broad jurisdiction in some other key areas on issues that are pending right now. So let's start first with election reform and the elephant in the room, voter ID. So talk a little bit about where we're at in that in Pennsylvania.
We understand that the average Republican, the average Democrat, the average independent all across Pennsylvania is okay with the idea of some kind of a voter ID. To check into my hotel at the Red Roof Inn tonight in Harrisburg, I'm going to need to show them my driver's license. I don't get inside of banks very often, but when I do, they want identification. And so certainly most people understand, it's just common sense. We don't want people voting that aren't allowed to vote. And so again and again and again, we say, let's do it. Well, the governor has said, no, we're not going to consider any kind of voter ID bill. You send it to me for voter verification, for voter security, I will veto it. Well, guess what we've learned with this constitutional amendment process? The governor doesn't get to vote or veto or sign constitutional amendments. And so I think in the next few weeks, you are going to see the House and the Senate, for the very first time in the history of Pennsylvania, pass a voter verification bill and put it on the ballot. It'll take us 2 years because constitutional amendments take time, but I think that you're going to see this in the Constitution of Pennsylvania, and there's not a darn thing that Governor Wolf can do about it.
Well, again, you've demonstrated your abilities in that regard. In an issue, the way it was worded was, I thought, almost impossible. As much as I pushed it on this show, I was hopeful. Someone once told me, as an old trial lawyer, Senator, that people in jury boxes have an amazing capacity to hear the truth, even when things go against you, a trial, which they often do. Well, the same thing could be applied to voters. And let me say one of the things, I did a couple of scathing editorials on this issue. And to me, I believe the Democrats, their portrayal of the issue is not only voter suppression, but somehow racist, that it's designed to water down or lessen or make it more difficult for minorities to vote, is one of the most pejorative, racist, and insulting concepts I've ever heard. What they're suggesting, Senator, is that people of color are not sophisticated enough or cultured enough or capable enough of filling out a basic ID card. as you've pointed out, the same one they need to buy alcohol, check into a hotel room, open a checking account, get on an airplane, or do any one of about 100 other things they do in their daily lives, that somehow all of a sudden to vote, well, you're trying to be a racist. I heard Jim Crow references. That's insulting to anybody with an IQ of above 40. And the fact that the Democrats would go down that road, and at some point, I read a view, Senator, by some of the leading congressmen, African American, in the United States Congress. They joined together and wrote a national op-ed piece and did a press conference saying exactly what I just said. Burgess Owens was part of that group and others. And in addition, about 20 African American leaders across this country that said to the Democrats, Stacey Abrams and President Biden, stop. What you're doing is demeaning, insulting, and racist. And why do you think people of color don't care about voter ID? Senator, there was a poll in Georgia done, a Rasmussen poll. Shockingly, almost 70% of African Americans and 82% of people of all colors, minorities, are in favor of voter ID in Georgia. So,
absolutely. No, it's common sense. And when I bring it up at a town hall meeting in Pottsville or Tamaqua, the question I usually get asked is, what's the other side afraid of?
Right. Yeah, well, and they claim they want security and integrity in elections, but then they want to draw rules up that are going to always, whether there's cheating or not, I'm not going down that road, but you have the appearance of impropriety. So why would you... I guess I don't understand. Well, that's why I used to be a Democrat senator, and now I'm Republican. As Ronald Reagan famously once said, I haven't changed who I am, my morals, my values. The Democratic Party has gone so far left, they left me. And at any rate, let's turn to another subject now.
We've seen it in places like northern Schuylkill County, where we won a seat last year that we hadn't won in 50 years as Republicans. It's because Democrats got fed up with some of the far left tilt of the party and overwhelmingly elected a Republican for the first time in places like Shenandoah and Monoy City.
Sure. And Senator, as further corroboration, the Republicans, when Joe Biden was winning the state of Pennsylvania for president, the Republican Party have an auditor general for the first time since, I believe, the late 80s, not Catherine Baker Newell, whatever, it'll come to me. You also have a state treasurer, Stacey Garrity, who won from Bradford County, one of the smallest counties in Pennsylvania, beat an incumbent Democrat, Joe Torsella, from Philadelphia, when Philadelphia voted a record number. And so to your point, the Democrats haven't apparently got the memo that their far left socialist, defund the police, critical race theory agenda for America is not appropriate in America or Pennsylvania. They didn't get the memo.
Chuck, it was the first time since 1958 that we had won those two offices as Republicans at the same time in Pennsylvania. So no, it was a historic election. Absolutely.
Yeah, Barbara Hafer, I believe, was the name I was looking for. But at any rate, let's move on now to another issue that you sit right in the front chair of and are integral to the process. The redistricting falls under your committee's jurisdiction. So can you update us on, because one of the questions I've been hearing, I'll just kind of give you a couple. You can start where you want. One is, we have elections coming up quickly on us next year. We have lost a federal U.S. congressional seat in Pennsylvania. That's one issue. And then the other issue is we have all these elections coming up next year, Senate seats, House seats in Pennsylvania. So, and the people are saying, well, we're already in midsummer and we still don't have a map yet. So take it up wherever you want.
Sure. We deal with the congressional redistricting through my committee. It's passed like any other bill, vote of the Senate, vote of the House, signature of the governor. Legislative redistricting for state senators and state representatives, that's handled separately through a 5-person bipartisan commission. So for the Congress, you're correct. We have slow growth in Pennsylvania compared to other states in the Sun Belt, and so we're going to lose another seat, as we have been losing seats every 10 years, I think, since the 1930s to the 1940s. And so when the census data finally comes to us, it's been delayed because of COVID, And so when we finally get the numbers late summer, early fall, then what we need to do is introduce a bill and hopefully get it to the governor's desk. The minority chairman, the Democratic chairman of my committee, is a guy by the name of Sharif Street. He's a senator from Philadelphia. His dad was mayor years ago. He and I work very well together. And our goal is to get this thing done on a bipartisan basis, avoid some of the hyper partisanship that we've seen on this issue in the past, see if both sides can't come together and get this job done.
Sure. Well, in tying in on that, I think you were involved, may have introduced the legislation. The bill number escapes me now. But one of the issues, the way the committees are constructed, you have 2 Republicans, you have 2 Democrats. They pick the third, or the fifth, I should say. It's 5 together. 2 R's, 2 D's, and they together. If they can't agree, which is always the case, they can't agree, it falls to the Supreme Court to choose who the 5th person is. Of course, that was a big issue in the elections back in 2015, I believe, because when the Supreme Court balance was in flux, I remember hearing campaign speeches on how important it was for redistricting. Well, I believe you were directly involved in a bill that may have your name on it that said that you wanted to put certain criteria on who the 5th position would be. In other words, they couldn't have recently run for office. They couldn't have a spouse that worked for a lobbyist or things like that. Do you want to kind of speak more to that effect?
Yeah, and that 5-person commission, again, is not for the congressional redistricting. That's for the state House and the state Senate. The bill, we passed it out unanimously. It's working its way through the Senate because our fear was, okay, we're stuck. We can't agree on the 5th person. The Supreme Court would come in and find someone nonpartisan like, I don't know, Ed Rendell to be the not exactly every Republican's goal in life.
Maybe it would be Marcel Groen. I hear he's looking for a job.
So we said, come on, cut us a break. So the bill hasn't passed yet, but the Supreme Court actually did what we suggested. They reached out to a former chancellor of the University of Pittsburgh. He's well regarded by both sides, both the Republicans and the Democrats in the state House and state senators saying, yes, that tie-breaking vote makes sense. We believe he'll treat us fairly. And so I still want to get the bill passed so that 10 years from now, we don't have to worry about this again.
Sure. Well, it makes sense. Talk about, I guess, one of the elephants in the room. I've been hearing like whispers and rumors. Where are we at with our budget talks? What kind of deficit vis-a-vis what federal money will come in to help alleviate the deficit, although that becomes a one-time fix. And as we learned in past with school funding, we got this big glut of money from the federal government. They plugged the hole of the educational deficit. Well, when the money was gone, we had an education deficit. As you're well aware, you were part of all that. Yes. So kind of talk about where we are at. June 30th looms for the budget. Kind of talk about that, if you would, in a general way. And I even heard, did I hear correctly, there might be a 2-year budget being discussed? But
that was discussed, but they've decided not to go that route.
Okay.
And so I believe we will pass the budget on time before June 30th. I believe we'll be able to do it with a bipartisan vote. And again, everything that we do has to be to some degree bipartisan because we have a Republican majority in the House, a Republican majority in the Senate, but a very liberal Democratic governor.
Right.
And so because of COVID, the state tax receipts in the last year took a major nosedive, but then things began to get better. The economy has begun to pick up again. People are anxious to get out, I think, and go shopping and go to a restaurant and spend some money. But also, as you had indicated, the federal government has given us a good bit of money to begin to recover from this terrible year. And so because of all those factors, we're running a surplus. But Senator Brown, Pat Brown from Allentown, is a tax attorney and a CPA who really digs into the numbers of every state budget. And he keeps reminding all of us, we're going to be okay this year, but what about next year? There are some deficits proposed for next year. And so I think what you will see us do is to be very careful, hopefully put some money away into the rainy day fund for next year so that we don't make the mistake that has been made in the past and saying, hooray, we have money to spend, and then we find ourselves in a hole again. What we've done to school districts is we've suggested, you've got some extra money from the federal government. Don't go out and hire 10 new teachers. Fix the hole in your roof. Look for those things that require one-time spending. Don't get yourself obligated for year after year after year, because who knows what the next year will look like.
Yeah, that's pretty good advice. One of the issues I've been paying attention to in other states, and maybe you can talk about where Pennsylvania is. One of the issues, it appears, our economy remains still sluggish. One of the difficulties has been by businesses, especially small businesses and employers, getting people to come back to work with all the money the federal government keeps just throwing at them like the lottery. And some states have actually said, stop, we're not taking it anymore. We got to get people to return to work. You're giving them incentives not to work, which is another burden on business. If Governor Wolf didn't do enough in a complete lockdown and shutdown of our economy, well, now we have this to deal with. And is that something you guys have discussed, and where do you stand on that, Senator?
Absolutely. No, I think every employer that I've talked to back home is begging us to try to get us back to normal again, especially in the restaurant business. They probably took it harder on the chin than anyone. And so we believe that unless Congress makes a terrible mistake and continues the extra unemployment dollars past September, we think then that will be the time. Some states, as you'd indicated, are saying, let's do it sooner. I could support that. We're told the governor will veto that bill. So it's in discussion. We're looking for ways to encourage people back to work, because certainly it just makes sense. Let's allow people to get back and do what they do best.
Sure. Well, I'll give you a real life example. I think the reason I asked that question is it hit home for me today. Now, I've been reading about this in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, and it's been a debated economic issue. It didn't hit me in real time until today. I stopped at my favorite Dunkin' Donut coffee shop on my way into work, as I do every single day. And when I went in the front door, instead of where they used to have a sign that you must wear a mask to enter, now they have a new sign. I can't believe I'm telling you this. They are offering a $500 signing bonus to attract employees to a Dunkin' Donut coffee shop. That's how bad things are, Senator.
I remember as a high school senior desperately looking for work a long time ago before I went off to college, couldn't find a job anywhere, and now people are begging workers to come back into the workplace.
When Dunkin' Donuts start offering signing bonuses, there goes the neighborhood, as somebody once said. Well, Dave, thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are in your Senate duties and caucus. A lot going on. June 30th looms. So on behalf of all of our viewers, thank you for making time. You're a friend of this show. You had mentioned Senator Pat Brown. He was on a few years ago discussing budget issues, a very brilliant man and an expert in what he does in accounting. So again, thanks for being on the show. And I'm taking summer siesta. This is our last show, but we'll be talking to you again in the fall if you'll make time again.
Anytime, Chuck. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator.
Right, bye-bye.
The Volpe Report returns Sunday, September 12th in its fall time slot at 10:30 a.m. on Fox 56.